Okay, so this right here is a ceramic model of a pigsty. Reminds you guys that pigs, chickens, horses, they come from the Fertile Crescent. And remind you whenever they went to anywhere that they were foreign to, including America, they brought diseases with them, and a lot of those diseases are still in place, not just in America, but the world, by way of these animals. I'm sorry. All right. So the fall of the Han and the age of division. So, of course, you know, you're going to be up here, but they all fall kind of the same way. And so remind you guys, in chapter 4, I told you the Chinese, they are the first ones to basically kind of create a name for it. And if it's not in this chapter, it's going to be in a later chapter on the Chinese. And so the Han Dynasty, they gradually fell into the hands of the eunuchs. And remind you, eunuchs, they were castrated male soldiers. And then a religious sect rose up in a massive revolt, and they were followed by a civil war. And so with China cut into thirds and the Han Dynasty removed from power, the era was known as the Age of Division, which is a key term for you guys. And so the regions in the south, they were established as a hereditary aristocracy with families that intermarried with other families of the same pedigree. And they also believed that they were maintaining the high culture of the Han Dynasty. And this is where the southern people, they established their capital at the city of Nanjing. And so the northern regions, they were ruled by non-Chinese, and they adopted Chinese traditional clothing, and they also made Chinese their official language, and their capital was located in the city of Luoyang. And so the spread of Buddhism out of India, remind you, we've talked about Buddhism, and I told you guys we will discuss it again, and different parts of it as well too. And so under Ashoka, remind you, Ashoka, he converted to Buddhism, and this brought him to a more calmer leader, ruler, king, etc. So under Ashoka in India, Buddhism is spread into the central parts of Asia, and Central Asian Buddhism, it was a form that was called Mahayana. And remind you guys, we talked about this in chapter 4, and Mahayana also means the great vehicle. And so Buddhism was influenced by regional religions, and also it became more devotional. And so the appeal and impact of Buddhism in China, you have the Buddhist monastic system. It played a major role in social and economic life. So the system, it rapidly spread throughout all of China. And so when we talk about the monastic system, even though we're talking about it under the religion of Buddhism, remind you that monastic system, they kind of apply to all religions. You know, under Christianity, people who are under the monastic systems are your nuns, and your monks. These are people who are celibate. They devote their life, their whole everything to the religion, the church, etc. Or their God, and their God. And so women, you know, they found Buddhism appealing because they were encouraged to pursue salvation on terms that was pretty much nearly as equal to men, because remind you, in that area, other religions such as Hinduism, you know, you were pretty much placed in a caste, a box, a level, and you were placed there. And women, they were not ever, you know, placed past a certain level on the caste system within the Hinduism. And so Buddhism, it was visually attractive, generating decorative temples and statues. And other people found Buddhism to be immoral, and a threat to the state. And monastery land, it was not taxed. And monks, they were not expected to perform labor services, but yet no attempt was made to pretty much suppress the religion. All right, so this right here, it shows us a map, the spread of Buddhism from 500 BCE to 800 CE. And of course, we know the area of origin is right here. And the green is the 5th to 2nd century BCE. 2nd century BCE to 3rd century CE is in the yellow, and 3rd century to 8th century is right here in the orange, Tibet. And we will also discuss, Buddhism with, under, the Tibetan, like a civilization or group of people as well, too. All right. And of course, the blue arrows just kind of show us in which way that it is spreading. And this right here is a monumental rock cut of Buddha at Yangnam. And this is a picture of a meditating monk. All right, so the Chinese Empire recreated the Sioux and the Tang dynasties. So in the Sioux Dynasty, 581 to 618 current time, this pretty much, the Sioux Dynasty, they reunited the Chinese as one. Remind you, this has not happened since the Qing unification. And so they took control of northern Vietnam, and they also confronted the Koreans and the Turkish people in the steppes. And so the Grand Canal was completed, and it also connected the Yellow and the Yangtze River regions. And the canal, it improved, and it improved shipping and influenced economic and political life. And remind you, the Grand Canal, it is a key term as well, too. And so the Sioux Dynasty, it lasted only for a few years. And the building of the canal, it led to discontent. And so a war in the north, it led the aristocrat Lil Wayne to finally force the Sioux out of power. And so this right here is a picture of urban planning. Remind you, in American history, in anyone's history, urban planning is very much a part of anyone's society, culture, city, because it shapes how everything is going to fluctuate, be built, etc. And so this is a picture of urban planning, and is very detailed, especially when you talk about like that time frame. And so the Tang Dynasty, from 618 to 907, you have the auxiliary troops. So the Tang rulers, they used auxiliary troops from non-Chinese sources, and they were able to invade Korea, Vietnam, and also Central Asia. And so during the Tang Dynasty, 2 women rose to political power, and Empress Wu, she was the consort of Emperor Guanzhang, and she took charge when the emperor suffered a stroke. And her grandson, who was Emperor Xuanzang, he fell in love with his consort Yang Guifei, and issues pertaining to the government were now a bother, and therefore the emperor allowed Yang to place friends and relatives in government positions. And so Yang placed General An Lushan in a government position, and he rebelled, and Xuanzang had to flee after the military executed Yang Guifei. And so with this, Empress Wu was actually a concubine and built her way up. She had the first son, which is kind of how she knocked the wife out of wife status, and made her way out of concubine, and ended up becoming the first empress of China. And so this right here is a map of showing Tang China in 750 CE. Tang China is in the orange. Everything else, Chinese cultural area, are in the yellow. All right. And so with the Tang culture, This is the Tang Dynasty was known as the Great Age of Poetry, and poetry writing skills, they were incorporated into the civil service exam. So the Buddhist monasteries, they ran schools for the children. They also provided lodging for travelers in remote areas. And they held money and merchandise for traders. So the monasteries, they also became banks and warehouses. And so the school of Buddhist thought was called Pure Land. And so Pure Land, it appealed to the lay people because it meant that it was the possibility of a rebirth in paradise, which they called the Pure Land. And so Chan Buddhism, which is also a key term, it was popular among the educated elite. And so the Chan focused on the superiority of mind-to-mind transmission of Buddhist truths. And so when you talk about that, the difference of the sections are like that amongst all of the different religions as well. And so this is an artifact. It's a 5-string pipa, a biwa. It's an instrument. And this is a figurine of a man and a woman mounted on horses. All right, so the East Asian cultural sphere, everything that we're discussing from the rest of this chapter on, we will continue it in a later chapter as well too. And so with the East Asian cultural sphere, in Vietnam, Truda was a formal general under the Tang Dynasty, and he founded the kingdom of Nam Viet, which we know as Vietnam. And so he killed all officials who were loyal to the Chinese emperor and made himself the ruler of a caste state. Let me go back right quick. And so with this being said, just as I said about, Hispanic descent, the same are for Asian descent. They don't like to be called the name of their oppressors. And so the Han Dynasty conquered Vietnam. They built roads and other forms of infrastructure. And in an attempt to overthrow the Chinese, it was led by the Trong sisters. But after they were defeated by the Han Dynasty, they ended up committing suicide. And this is a map of the kingdom of Nam Viet or Vietnam. And with Korea, the Chinese-Korean relations, they expanded during the Warring States period, and Korea was overthrown by the Han Dynasty. And so the Han, they coexisted with the native Korean kingdom of Goryeo. And later the Chinese were overthrown, and Goryeo and the other 2 colonies, they basically were entered into the area known as the Three Kingdoms period. And when the Sioux Dynasty tried to retake Korea, the Three Kingdoms were very much stronger together, and they were able to defeat China's advances. And this eventually Korea, they were unified under Silla, and all of these things will be discussed in a later chapter as well too. And this map is showing us Korea and of course Japan. And Japan actually was attached to the rest of Asia, but it broke off after the Ice Age into 4 different islands. And so with Japan breaking off into the 4 islands during the Ice Age, that's what it became. And so the native religion of Japan was Shinto, and it was established by the Yamato rulers, which we will also discuss later. And the Japanese capital was Nara, and it was founded on the concept of the Tang capital city of Chang'an. And being an island nation, the Japanese had never been introduced to a variety of diseases. But once they start to come into contact with populations on the mainland, of course, they started to have plagues of smallpox or bouts with measles or other diseases because they were coming in contact with things that they had never did before. And so the Tang Dynasty of China also inspired the spread of Buddhism and the construction of Buddhist temples in Japan in the 8th century. And all of these things we will discuss later on. Be sure to review both video 1 and 2, which covers chapter 7. And I'll see you guys on Monday, 10/17. Have a good one.